Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. After meeting with Israeli government officials, U.S. Secretary Anthony Blinken says there will be a humanitarian pause in the Gaza Strip. An Alberta Conservative MP explains why he feels the federal government needs to do more to keep hardened criminals behind bars. And a grandparent scam that's made its way to southwestern Alberta. We hear from police on what it is and the best way you can protect yourself.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. The White House says Israel has agreed to a 4-hour daily humanitarian pause to allow civilians to flee Gaza beginning tomorrow. U.S. President Joe Biden asked Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to bring in the daily pauses. It's raising hopes that hundreds of more people with connections to Canada will be able to leave Gaza through the Rafah border crossing into Egypt. Dozens were met by Canadian officials on the Egyptian side on Tuesday, but no Canadians have been allowed to cross as the border remained closed. Officials in Gaza say children were among the victims either killed or rushed to the Khan Yunis hospital following recent strikes by the Israeli military, which hit 2 buildings. Thousands of residents have fled to the southern part of Gaza as fighting between Israel and Hamas continues. Khan Yunis is located in the south and has been targeted for attacks despite Israel telling Palestinians to evacuate there from the north. According to the Hamas-run health ministry, more than 10,000 people have died in the region since the terrorist group Hamas attacked southern Israel on October 7th, leaving more than 1,400 people dead. A maternity ward in Gaza is struggling as doctors are receiving more and more pregnant mothers who are giving birth to their babies prematurely.
كثير من الستات الحوامل في ظل هالظروف الصعبة هذه في ظل الحرب والاسترس اللي بتعرضن له ففي زيادة ملحوظة في عدد الحالات المبكرة. كل الأجهزة الموجودة أمامكم هذه تعتمد على الكهرباء. في ظل عدم وجود التيار الكهربي سوف تتوقف هذه الأجهزة جميعا عن العمل وبالتالي سوف يتعرض الأطفال كلهم إلى الموت المحقق.
Meanwhile, posters of the more than 200 hostages who were kidnapped by Hamas terrorists last month are being torn down all over the world. One Israeli couple says they'll keep putting them up until all of the hostages are returned home safely.
We came up with the kidnapped poster because we found the milk cartons of the missing kids that used to be spreaded in supermarkets, and it's very, very iconic and people know it. When we see the amount of hate that we get, on these posters, we just keep thinking to ourselves, we put the posters there because we want to do something good, because we're coming with good intentions, pure good intentions, to bring back home innocent civilians, and then people are coming with pure evil and just tearing them apart.
As Global Affairs Canada tries desperately to get hundreds with ties to Canada back to our country, a couple from suburban Detroit recently returned home following their harrowing evacuation from Gaza.
Every minute we count. The bomb is gonna come into us. If I wanna die, okay, I don't care. Die. Just I don't wanna just cut my feet, cut my legs, cut my hand, and stay like this. And I say, God, whatever you wanna do, do. All my mind back home with my kids and my family. I don't know, an hour is gonna be die, it's gonna be life. That's what I'm thinking all the time. I need to get him out before we die. Thank you.
Israel's Minister of Strategic Affairs says his country is determined to wipe out the terrorist group Hamas in Gaza. Ambassador Ron Dermer says it's very important that Gaza no longer represents a threat to Israel. He made the comment on TBN's Centerpoint program.
We are very determined to achieve the goal that was set out by the Israeli cabinet, which is to eliminate their military capabilities, Hamas's military capabilities, to end Hamas's rule in Gaza, and to ensure that Gaza no longer represents a threat to Israel. So you can't leave a remnant of Hamas there. You can't just cripple it and walk away because then they're just going to build themselves up again. We've learned that lesson right now. And after that horrific attack on October 7th, I think the people of Israel are resolved to eliminate Hamas once and for all. And that's what we're going to do. How we do it is a question that the world will see in the days, weeks, and even months ahead, because it's very hard fighting in Gaza. You know, it took your forces in Mosul maybe 9 months when you were fighting the Islamic State there in an urban area. It takes a long time to do it. So I know everybody wants a rapid victory. We would like a rapid victory, but the most important thing is to achieve the goal of a victory and to free Gaza from Hamas once and for all.
Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly says all countries of the G7 are united in their support for Israel during their war with Hamas. Joly says the terrorist group must release all of the hostages and more aid needs to make its way to the Palestinian people.
We've appointed a senior official for hostage affairs. You know her. Her name is Julie Sunday. She's my Assistant Deputy Minister for Consular Affairs. Julie was in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem recently. She has left Israel. She is now heading to Egypt and will be heading to Qatar afterwards. Now, on the question of the humanitarian situation in Gaza, of course, we call for humanitarian pauses, humanitarian truce. There are good news coming from the White House today, and we'll be following up on this. We need, of course, more fuel, food, and water to be sent to Gaza.
Police in Montreal say 2 Jewish schools were shot at on Wednesday night. They say the front doors were struck by bullets, and fortunately no one was injured. It's not clear when the shots were fired, but police received 911 calls about the 2 incidents at 8:20 and 8:50 a.m. on Thursday. The 2 schools which were hit were Talmud Torah Elementary School, and the other was Yeshiva Gedola of Montreal. Earlier this week, Molotov cocktails were also thrown at a Montreal synagogue. The president of a Jewish advocacy organization says the Jewish community has a long history in Quebec and Jews in the province are under attack. Yair Zlak, president of Federation CGA, says anti-Semitism is not a problem that Jews alone can solve. Conservative parliamentarians are calling on the Trudeau government to support Bill S-281. It's an act to amend the Corrections and Conditional Act, or parole review. They say too many hardcore criminals are on the streets and are reoffending. Alberta Tory MP Michael Cooper says the federal government is not doing enough to protect Canadians.
After 8 years of Justin Trudeau, this is a government that has consistently put the rights of criminals first and the rights of victims last. And so that was not done, despite calls by Conservatives for the government to do that. But putting aside the notwithstanding clause, there are legislative options at the government's disposal, options that they have not taken. This bill is one such option. Although it is broader in the sense that it would apply to all persons, all criminals convicted of murder, let's face it. If you have been convicted of murder and you have served your minimum sentence, in the case of first-degree murder, 25 years, in the case of second-degree, anywhere from 10 to 25, and you get your kick at the can to apply for parole after serving that period of time, and you are turned down, almost certainly the reason for it is you are not releasable.
Premier Daniel Smith says a big reason why her government is changing the way health care is provided in Alberta is because there are far too many delays. Smith says patients and providers need to be at the centre, which is where they belong. Smith made the comment during the keynote speech at the Rural Municipalities of Alberta Fall Convention and Trade Show in Edmonton.
So the new, better integrated system will be built around 4 key priorities: primary care, acute care, continuing care, and mental health and addiction. This structure will ensure that each area gets the attention it deserves, uses staff more effectively, and allows more space for immediate decisions and responses to local conditions. Our goal is for the system to be adaptable. So if your community has specific acute needs in one specific area, the system will be able to shift to meet that local demand. And not because AHS has decided it from on high, but because staff and healthcare decision makers in the region have the freedom to react and to respond.
One person has been charged following a shooting which took place inside of a business in Brooks last August. RCMP say they received a call back on August 24th about a disturbance at a local business. Now, when they arrived around 1 in the morning, they found a man who accidentally shot himself with a firearm. He was taken to hospital with serious injuries. 45-year-old Johannes Tekestia Brooks faces various charges, including possession of a prohibited weapon, pointing a firearm, and various drug charges, including possession of cocaine and meth. Tekestia is scheduled to appear in Brooks Court on November the 22nd. Lethbridge police are warning about a grandparent scam which is making the rounds. The grandparent or emergency scam, as it's often called, involves fraudsters targeting seniors by calling and pretending to be a family member, usually a grandchild, claiming they're in trouble and need money immediately. The caller may also pretend to be a police officer or lawyer acting on the grandchild's behalf. Police say the scammers may also seek payment in the form of gift cards, Bitcoin, or e-transfers. Sergeant Kevin Talbot with the LPS says there are ways you can protect yourself from becoming a victim.
First thing that you should do is verify that the information that they're giving you is accurate. So, for example, if your grandson's been arrested, well, call a parent, call someone close to them and find out where exactly are they, or call them directly yourself to find out if they are in fact in trouble. You can also call the police department. So verify that you're actually have an urgent request and that it's from the person you think it's from. Never ever rely on the contact information though provided by this person on the other end of the phone, because if they give you a phone number to call, it's just going to be to another scammer.
Sergeant Talbot adds the best thing you can really do is just to simply end the call with the scammer. This Saturday is Remembrance Day here in Canada, a time to honor our veterans, remembering the sacrifices they made to give us the freedoms we enjoy today. The Remembrance Day Parade and service will be hosted by the General Stewart Branch No. 4 of the Royal Canadian Legion at the Agri-Food Hub and Trade Centre. Doors will open at 9 a.m. with a ceremony beginning at 10:45 a.m. Now, another ceremony will take place same time, 10:45 a.m. on Saturday at the Cenotaph on Veterans Avenue in front of the Yates Memorial Centre. Organizers said will include a flyby from a Harvard aircraft. Loudspeakers will also be set up for this year for better audio. And by the way, city officials at City Hall say City Hall will be closed on Monday for Remembrance Day, but will reopen on Tuesday. The Alberta Living Wage Network has released its new living wage for Lethbridge. The group says the new living wage is $20.60 an hour for our city. That's an increase of 30 cents over the last year, even after affordability measures were dished out by both the federal and provincial governments. Jackie Salazak, Executive Director for the United Way for Lethbridge and Southwestern Alberta, says unfortunately, some employers here in our city are only paying $16 to $17 an hour, what makes it tougher for employees to make ends meet.
The living wage is actually what it actually costs to live and participate in the community. And so if an employer is paying minimum wage or just above minimum wage, it may impact the quality of life for employees. And so we really want to make sure that employers understand that, and that employees may have to take on a second job or a third job, and that they may also have to be living in tight quarters with others to help take on the impacts of what they're facing of not being maybe to participate in the community and make ends meet.
The living wage is defined as an hourly wage a worker needs to earn in order to cover the basics such as rent, utilities, and food. You know, we all go through stress, whether it's stress from our jobs, our relationships, or even stress at school. Dr. Galinda Metz is a neuroscience professor at the University of Lethbridge, and she says sometimes stress can be a positive thing for our bodies.
We've seen that stress can actually enhance performance. Especially acute stress can make us thrive and deal better with an emergency
So are you talking about like
situation.
good stress versus bad stress?
This is the effect of good stress, that's right. We're talking about emergency situations, and we talk about the fight or flight response that make us thrive in the face of an acute stressor or an acute emergency situation. And we can perform better. We can do better on tests, we can do better in oral presentations, we can fight a fire better or run away from an emergency situation.
Who would have thought of that? Make sure you catch the full interview with Gerlinda Metz, professor at the U of L, and BCN's Naveen Day coming up later in our broadcast. Well, the strike by actors in Hollywood appears to be over. The Actors Union reached a tentative deal with Hollywood film and TV studios, ending the historic walkout. The strike had shut down productions across the industry for close to 4 months. It also raised questions over the future of the entertainment business.
I was at home, relaxing, and I started seeing Twitter kind of going off, and I was like, not sure if this source is credible, not sure if this was. Then I saw it in LA Times, and then I saw Francis Fisher post it and the WGA congratulate us, and I was like, oh my goodness.
But I was really happy. I was just like, and at the same time, it's just like, breathe.
Actually, I thought it was going to last until the Oscars. I'm glad I was wrong, so I'm happy.
My agent has been leaning on me to make sure that all my I's are dotted and my T's are crossed. So when she hit me up around 5 and said the strike was over, she was like, get ready.
Hopefully we can see some new movies fairly soon. Well, it was on this day that Germans danced on top of the Berlin Wall as communism crumbled in Eastern Europe. A massive blackout hit the Northeast in both Canada and the United States, and actor Art Carney from The Honeymooners passed away. This is Today in History for November the 9th.
November 9th, 1989. A sign that the end of the Cold War is near as joyous Germans dance atop the Berlin Wall. Communist East Germany throws open its borders, allowing its citizens to travel freely to the west. 1938. What becomes known as Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass in Germany and Austria. That's where the Nazis loot and burn synagogues as well as Jewish-owned stores and houses. 1965. A series of power failures plunges the Northeast into darkness for 13 and a half hours. The blackout leaves 30 million people in 7 states and 2 Canadian provinces without electricity. 1953. Dylan Thomas, the Welsh author and poet, dies in New York at age 39. And 2003.
Now listen, Ralph, as long as we're neighbors, you don't have to call me Norton. Call me Eduardo.
Actor Art Carney, who played Ed Norton in the classic TV sitcom The Honeymooners, dies in Connecticut at age 85. Today in History, November 9th. Mike Gracia, The Associated Press.
Yeah, my mother was a big fan of that show, The Honeymooners. Well, we enjoyed another mild day in Lethbridge, and the warmer temperatures should be sticking around. Full weather details are coming up. You know, we've been talking about how early the sun sets. Well, when it rises in the morning, it can also be quite spectacular. Here are a couple of pictures Linda Gaymonot from Hinton, Alberta sent us regarding a recent sunrise in her neck of the woods. Beautiful. Look at all of that color. Pinks and purples, a little bit of yellow there. Very nice. Thanks so much, Linda. Well, here in southwestern Alberta, we too enjoyed lots of sunshine mixed with a few clouds and pretty mild. Tonight, it'll be partly cloudy with a low near -3 degrees. Friday clearing with a high expected near 8. Now on Remembrance Day Saturday, it should be mainly clear with a high near 10 degrees. Pretty much the same picture on Sunday with a high of 10 degrees once again. Even warmer on Monday with the mercury increasing to 14. Tuesday the clouds return, but we should still see a high of 11. Wednesday sun mixed with clouds and a high of 8. Now the average high for this time of year is 6 degrees with an average low of -6. The record high was 18 set back in 1987, and the record low was a very chilly -28 set way back in 1945. The sun rose at 7:33 and set at 4:56. Let's see how the rest of Canada's looking for Friday now. It'll be mainly cloudy and 10 degrees in Victoria, a good chance of showers developing at 10 as well for Vancouver. Expect sun mixed with cloud and a high of 7 degrees in Edmonton. Clearing at 6 is on tap for Calgary. Expect a high of only -6 degrees in Regina on Friday, +1 is on tap for Saskatoon. In Winnipeg, it'll be mainly cloudy and a high near freezing mark, near 0. In the central part of the country, expect light showers and a high of 8 degrees in Toronto, rain mixed with snow and a high of 5 degrees in Ottawa, showers and a high of 6 for Montreal. In Atlantic Canada, expect rain and a high of 7 degrees in Fredericton, a good chance of rain developing and a high of 8 degrees in Halifax, showers and 6 for Charlottetown, and in St. John's, there will be clouds and showers and a high of 5 degrees on Friday. The CEO of Air Canada has issued an apology. Michael Rousseau says the airline has fallen short when it comes to accessibility. He says the carrier is rolling out new ways to improve travel for passengers with a disability. That would include boarding passengers who request lift assistance, along with implementing new training for its employees. Stats Canada says that 60% of the 2.2 million people with disabilities in our country faced a barrier when using federally regulated transportation back in 2019 and 2020. Estate planning. Now, does it matter if you're hoping to preserve as much of your wealth and assets as possible for future generations? Stephen Mogden is a partner at the law firm Stringham here in Lethbridge. He says sometimes people can go a little too far with leaving an inheritance to the point that they aren't living their lives to the fullest.
We do see situations where people who are, they have an estate and they're going to be distributing some estate to loved ones, family members, friends, what have you. They sometimes go through really extraordinary measures to try to maximize their estate and provide something to those beneficiaries. Sometimes to the extent where they're not really living their life to the fullest. And, we really hate to see that, right? An estate should be kind of what's left over once you've lived your life, right?
Lawyer Stephen Mogden will also discuss why it's very important for unmarried adults without dependents to properly plan their estate. That interview with BCN's Naveen Day is coming up after business news. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 57 points on the day to finish at 19,587. The Dow was down 220 points to 33,891. The S&P 500 was down 35 on the day to 4347, and the Nasdaq was down 128 points to 13,521. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 20 cents to 75.53 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 7 cents to 304 US. Gold was up 807 on the day to 1958.27 US an ounce, and silver was up 8 cents to 22.64 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $9.30 per bushel, barley's at $7.30, canola's at $15.62, and corn is at $8.58 per bushel. Live cattle December contract was down $5.05 to $174.35. Feeder cattle were down $5.55 to $2.29, and lean hogs December contract was down 5 cents to $71.45. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 72.43 US. Recapping one of our top stories, the White House says Israel has agreed to a 4-hour daily humanitarian pause to allow civilians to flee Gaza starting tomorrow. U.S. President Joe Biden asked Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to bring in the daily pauses. It is raising hopes that hundreds of more people with connections to Canada will be able to leave Gaza through the Rafah border, crossing into Egypt. Coming up, BCN's Naveen Day chats with lawyer Stephen Mogden about estate planning for adults who are single. It's an informative interview you won't want to miss. Listen, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. And if you missed any of today's local stories, check out our website, bridgecitynews.ca.
Here's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar. Come join the festivities at the second annual Christmas tree lighting event on Friday, November 17th, taking place in Festival Square at 5 p.m. Enjoy live music, pictures with Santa Claus, free cookie decorating, and feel the spirit of the holiday as the 18-foot Christmas tree is lit up for the season. Lethbridge Sport Council's Indoor Roving Gyms program is taking place Tuesdays at Emmanuel Lutheran Church from 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. and Thursdays at the Service Sports Center from 10 to 11 a.m. This program is for kids ages 5 and under and their caregivers. Come and enjoy an hour of fun and get active. Pre-registration is required and space is limited. For details and to register, visit lethbridgesportcouncil.ca/roving gyms. And that's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar.
There are some Canadians that spend up to 100% of their net income any which way they see fit. Must be nice. They are unmarried adults without dependents. And while Christmas, Easter, and Thanksgiving might be lonely times for them, they get to live their lives with little to no accountability to a partner or a child. But what happens when they die and there's no last will in place? To talk more about estate planning for singles is Stephen Mogden. He is a partner at the law firm Stringham in Lethbridge, Alberta. Stephen, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thanks for having me, Naveen.
So Stephen, first off, it is plainly clear why a person who is married and or with children should plan their estate, or at the very least, write a last will and testament. For some of our single viewers, it may not be so clear for them if they don't have anyone they think really needs to inherit their possessions or take care of their affairs once they pass. So, is estate planning still important for singles to consider?
Yeah, and I get this question a lot from young people, usually young people that are not married, have this question for me. And my advice is, well, there's a few points to consider. Number one, where they're at in their life, they may not have a lot of assets. They may not have, that marital relationship or kids that they would be considering as beneficiaries. But that's not going to be the case forever. Things are going to change for them. They're going to get older. They're going to acquire assets. They're going to have relationships and that sort of thing. And so a person should start to think about that early. One of the main reasons for doing that is if you don't, if you just allow your estate to be dealt with through what our legislation in Alberta provides for people that don't have a will, you're not in control of how that's going to be dealt with. And for some people, that might work out okay. For others, it may well not. And it might actually lead to some conflict among family members and that sort of thing.
And what happens to the debt once you pass if there's no one to pass it on to?
Well, so when you pass away, if you have debt, if your estate has debt, that's going to be satisfied through your assets, the estate assets. In some situations, people will pass away and have more debt than they have in terms of assets. And in that circumstance, the legislation deals with that here in Alberta. Some types of debts are preferred, things like funeral expenses and that sort of thing. But then as long as the person that's administering the estate, whether it's an executor or an administrator, as long as they do that correctly, they won't be held liable for those debts, and neither will the estate. So it's important to have some advice if you're in that circumstance. But certainly we don't deal with situations where, or we don't see situations where, a lot of debt is being visited on beneficiaries that don't have any ability to pay for that.
Okay, so I just wanted to take a more lighthearted approach for just a moment here, because I must admit, I fall into the latter group because I'm not married, I don't have children, and I can't be the only one who has thought to themselves, at least at one point, wait a second here, if I know I'm going to be close to the end of my life, couldn't I just give away my valuables while I'm still alive and then rack up my credit, take some expensive trips, and then let the courts settle my debts with the table scraps of my estate that are left over?
No, it's just you, Naveen. Nobody else thinks that. No, I'm just kidding. No, a lot. I've had that question before, and I do like the lighthearted questions around this because it's a very serious topic, but sometimes it's a little too serious, right? When I was going through law school, the professor that I took wills and estates from made it a point to say very early on, I think it was the first day, this is a fact of life. This is stuff that has to get dealt with. So, I mean, don't sort of tiptoe around it or anything like that. Deal with it head on, and that's the best approach for everybody. If you have that crystal ball and you know exactly when you're going to pass away, then by all means book the trips and ride it out that way. And I wish the best of luck to you. Most people, unfortunately, don't know that. So for a lot of people that do know, approximately when they're going to be passing away, it's likely a situation where they don't have the health that they're going to be able to enjoy those trips and that sort of thing. So we don't see that a lot, but there is, lots of people will say as their estate plan, they're going to, spend everything during their lifetime, and there's going to be nothing for the kids, right? And I mean, people say that jokingly, but by all means, live your life to the fullest. Just to turn that on a bit of a serious note for a moment, we do see situations where people who are, they have an estate and they're going to be distributing some estate to loved ones, family members, friends, what have you. They sometimes go through really extraordinary measures to try to maximize their estate and provide something to those beneficiaries. Sometimes to the extent where they're not really living their life to the fullest, and we really hate to see that, right? An estate should be kind of what's left over once you've lived your life, right? You do the best you can to maximize what you earn, what you're able to acquire, and that sort of thing, because you want to have a good standard of living and all that stuff. But that's for every generation, right? Every generation goes through that. So if you're living sort of the end of your life to be able to provide something to the younger generation, maybe that's not the best way to approach it. So, and I've had to say that to people before.
Great answer. Now, I just want to draw from that previous scenario again for one more question. A little bit more of on a serious note, though. What about cases where there is malicious intent behind who your estate goes to? Like, let's say there's two people that feuded throughout their lives, and one decides to have the last laugh by assigning their estate to their opponent, but then gives away most of the assets prior to passing, leaving only the debt behind. Are there safeguards in place to prevent this from happening?
There are. Usually the first safeguard, in fact, is the lawyer that's meeting with the person to draw up that will, because you should be getting that information from that person about who their beneficiaries are and what they want to leave to those beneficiaries. And through that process, if you're learning, if I'm learning from my client that this is what their intention is, they have somebody that it's been a lifelong battle and they want to do this type of thing, I'm really going to dissuade them from that. And I might even say to them, if you want to do this, I'm not your guy to do this, right? Because I firmly believe an estate plan should be done right, and it should be for the best of intentions. That aside, if a person did go through that and they were able to create a will that did that, there are safeguards in place where, if there's more debt than there are assets, like I say, a beneficiary doesn't necessarily have to take that on if the estate has been administered correctly. And the person who's administering the estate, usually an executor, sometimes called an administrator, if they're doing it correctly, they're not going to have any personal liability for that either. So it's certainly possible to avoid that.
Great. Now, in addition to a last will and testament, what other documents are important in estate planning?
And so usually when we're doing a will for someone, we're also encouraging them to do a personal directive and a power of attorney. And there's a few reasons for that. The will deals with what's going to happen with their property, their stuff, when they pass away. But we often go through a period in life where, before we pass away, where we have a diminished capacity or we've completely lost capacity and we can't make decisions about our personal affairs or our financial affairs. And that's where the personal directive and the power of attorney come in. Very often when people are doing their will, the person that they're going to appoint in their will to be their executor is probably also the person they're going to want to appoint to be the person making decisions for them under the personal directive. So those are personal decisions, healthcare decisions, where they're going to live, that type of thing. And also the same person who's going to act as the attorney under their power of attorney. And those are for financial decisions. So it's a good idea to do them all at the same time. And they're really good to have, right? If you go through that scenario where you've lost your capacity, whether it's dementia, Alzheimer's, just sort of general aging, an accident, anything like that, and somebody has to make decisions for you. If you haven't appointed someone through those documents, then someone's going to have to go to the court and get an order for guardianship and trusteeship. And that can be a very intimidating process, can be a lengthy process. It's just a lot easier to deal with it by creating those documents, the personal directive and the power of attorney. And they're fairly short documents. They're not difficult to do. They're easy to understand. So we do encourage people to do that. Outside of those, in terms of estate planning documents, we will see situations where people might want to put in place a trust, like an inter vivos trust, so a trust while they're still alive. And the purpose for that generally is to be able to distribute funds to beneficiaries while you're still alive, right? And so we often see that with kids, particularly kids who are away from home and that sort of thing. And the parent wants to start to, get that transition process going, where they're not just sort of sitting on all of their assets. They're providing some money for kids. So trusts are a little bit complicated sometimes, and they're not for everybody. It depends certainly on the circumstances, but that's another document that we'll see for sure.
Now, for those that really have not a single person to inherit their estates, let's say they're the youngest of all the siblings, never married, never had any kids, what are the alternatives to leaving your belongings and to someone else, or can we just talk about trust funds and scholarships and charitable donations for a bit?
Oh, for sure. And so I used to think that it was an extremely unlikely, uncommon situation where a person had absolutely no beneficiaries, and so they didn't know where to put their estate. But I have recently seen a situation where a person left their estate, and it wasn't massive. It was under $150,000, but they left it to a charitable institution in town because they had done a bunch of things with that institution throughout their life. And the story of it is that they had gone into the lawyer and basically said kind of what your question contains. I have nobody. I don't have anybody close that I want to give this to. What should I do? And the lawyer that they did that with had suggested this charitable institution. And so the fellow said, okay, let's do that. And so that's one way to do it. So that sort of legacy giving in your will is important for a lot of people. Some people will do it as a specific part of their estate planning, where they're definitely giving a portion to, the SPCA or, something like that. Some people will use it as sort of a safety valve, right? If, for example, they've said everything's going to go to my kids, or if I don't have any kids and I have grandkids, then it'll go to grandkids. But if nobody's around in that scenario, if there's no beneficiaries, truly, if you have that sort of safety valve where you're giving your estate to a charity, to your church, to a women's shelter, whatever the case may be, then at least somebody's getting it, and it's not going back to the province, because that is ultimately what can happen to an estate where there truly are no beneficiaries. Is it can pull out the legal language, it can escheat to the Crown, and I don't think anybody really wants to see that except for the government, but your average person doesn't want to see that. So, I mean, if I take myself, for example, I have a very close association with the YMCA here in Lethbridge. And so that's part of my estate planning, is a gift for the YMCA. So, it's something that I encourage people to look at doing. And most of the time, when I encourage people to do that, they'll say, well, I don't really know where to do that. And then they'll come back to me a little bit later on and they'll say, yeah, these are the things that are important to me. And that's what I want in there.
And it's all about leaving a legacy too. I mean, like the name Cor Van Ray obviously comes to mind when we talk about that, especially with the YMCA. Now, singles are often focused on themselves, their careers, and the life that they create for themselves, mostly because they can. Assuming one is healthy, at what age should you sit down and start planning your estate?
So there's the technical correct answer, and there's the answer of what most people do. The correct answer is you should do it once you turn 18, right? You should at least be appointing people who are going to be able to make decisions for you if there was some sort of accident and you were rendered incapable of making decisions about your affairs. So we would always encourage people to have a personal directive and a power of attorney in place in case something like that happens. Those people often will not have property that they're going to, be able to distribute, but they might come into that sooner than they might think, right? And I kind of alluded to that off the top of the interview here. People might themselves come into an estate, right? Their parent might pass away, and through that they might receive, a bunch of money or property. They should have a plan on how they want to deal with it. Typically, when we're dealing with younger people, most of the time they're sort of in their mid-20s when they start to look at, acquiring a getting the first house kind of thing, and then and kids come along and that sort of thing. Another important feature of the will is the ability to designate someone who will be guardian for an infant child. So that's an important part of it for younger people. The reality is a lot of people don't really start to consider sort of their own mortality and that type of thing until a little bit later, 30s, sometimes 40s. But it's tough to get people to think about that when they're young. Absolutely.
Well, that's all the time we have for today, Stephen, but we really appreciate having you on the show today and giving us these insightful answers.
Naveen, pleasure.
We all know that stress is bad for us, and chronic stress can cause negative health effects on your mood, immune and digestive systems, and cardiovascular health. A pioneer in the field of neuroscience, Dr. Gerlinda Metz has been recognized universally as a researcher and professor at the University of Lethbridge. She joins me today to discuss her work on the correlation between environmental factors like stress and their impacts on the body. Dr. Metz, thank you for your time today. Welcome to Bridge City News.
Hello, Naveen. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great, and it's great to be here. So can you just tell us a little bit about your research, which is exploring the relationship between stress and life experiences and brain plasticity?
Yeah, like you mentioned, stress is a really wide field of research. You can study pretty much any aspect related to lifestyle and health and medical sciences, and so it's been really fun for us to explore a wider area of stress and how chronic and acute stress affects our day-to-day functioning and behavior and mental health and also physical health, as a matter of fact. And so we've been venturing out into many areas now, moving from experimental basic studies into working with vulnerable human individuals and families affected by natural disaster and war and migration. And we've also been working with astronauts and athletes and various other parts or individuals in our population that are affected by the effects of chronic and toxic stress too.
So what made you want to delve into this industry and what's been the outcome so far?
So we've been realizing that stress really functions as in a dose-dependent curve, I would say, because you have low levels of stress that can enhance our performance. Then you've got positive outcomes in relation to stress. But when stress becomes longer lasting or severe, or we have cumulative effects of stress that come at repeated times during our lifetime or even in previous generations, they can actually have some adverse effects. That means cause some negative health outcomes. And we're really trying to understand what's the best dose of stress versus the negative dose of stress. And that's been a lot of fun to explore, but it's also a very challenging field.
Now, how do you approach studying complex issues like these? Like, are there certain methodologies or techniques that you use?
Well, at the Canadian Centre for Behavioral Neuroscience, we're really interested in behavioral neuroscience and neurobiology. So we're using behavior as an integrative outcome of everything that happens inside the brain and inside the body to reflect well-being at the more holistic level. So we're not only looking at the brain, but we're also looking at the interactions of the brain with the rest of the body, and also how the rest of the body, like function of organs, like kidney and liver and heart and the gut, affect the function of the brain as well. So it's a big field, but it's been really great to work together with a fantastic team of trainees and collaborators on these projects.
And what are some of your key findings regarding stress and brain plasticity?
So we've been looking at various different populations ranging from astronauts to families, mothers and children, and also animal models. And we've seen that stress can actually enhance performance. Especially acute stress can make us thrive and deal better with an emergency
So are you talking about like
situation.
good stress versus bad stress?
This is the effect of good stress, that's right. We're talking about emergency situations, and we talk about the fight or flight response that make us thrive in the face of an acute stressor or an acute emergency situation. And we can perform better. We can do better on tests, we can do better in oral presentations, we can fight a fire better or run away from an emergency situation. So this is very helpful, and this goes along with adjustments inside of the brain, and it can enhance performance, like certain neurotransmitters coming on board, hormones coming on board that make us do very well in those situations. So we should trust our stress response in those situations because it's been evolved over millions of years, really, that we come to be here. And so that we have a really great set, a mindset and a physical set of abilities to deal with stress really well.
So you're talking about some real world applications here, like working with fire and EMS. You also mentioned astronauts, which is really interesting. Let's talk about that a little bit more. Like, what kind of work are you doing with astronauts, and how is your research helping to affect people's lives in a positive way?
Yeah, so for wonderful collaborations with people here, colleagues and trainees at the University of Lethbridge, and nationally and internationally, we've been able to expand our research program, and we were also asked to participate in a study with NASA, and they have been very generous in sharing resources with us that are very precious. We have access to samples from NASA astronauts who spent an extended period of time on the International Space Station, up to 6 months, and we had compared how male and female astronauts adapt to being in space versus also coming back to Earth. And these studies are really important because right now we read and hear a lot about long duration space flight and exploration of Mars. We do have the Artemis project coming on where astronauts are flying around the moon. This is a long period to spend in space. And we want to understand how space travel and the stress associated with space travel affect our health and affect potentially future of human populations who want to explore space more.
Now, I'm more interested in you now. What inspired you to get into this field of study? Was it like an influential person or some events, something that you saw on TV, a book you read? Like, what's the story behind you?
That's a great question, because for me, my interest in neuroscience in general and behavioral neuroscience in particular goes back to me being 4 or 5 years old, because I wanted to work with animals and I wanted to understand their behavior and I wanted to understand what changes their behavior. And then I got probably influenced a little bit by the classic ethologists like Konrad Lorenz, who published about imprinting of gray geese, and I've done that with chickens and replicated some of his work during school times. And then I really, this idea of working with animals, working with them closely, one-on-one, and getting to know them and understanding where their behavior comes from, how they respond to the environment, how they interact, that stuck with me throughout my career. But of course, we don't do much good if we just study animal behavior and don't help individuals in our community. So we really make sure that we are translating our research and that we are really learning about mechanisms from animals, but we translate and bring that into the clinical world so that we can ultimately help individuals, help our community, give back to the community, and help vulnerable individuals in our community with our research. And this is really what motivates us to do what we do every day.
So let's talk about the influence of pop culture and is it creating an interest in neuroscience? Because we were talking before the interview about one show, The Big Bang Theory, where one of the characters, the woman who played Dr. Amy Farrah Fowler as a neuroscientist, she's a neuroscientist in real life. So has shows like that affected people's thinking and interest in the field of neuroscience?
Well, I think there's definitely an increase in interest in sciences in general, motivating young fellows to participate in STEM research, STEM fields. But also neuroscience, of course, is always a hot topic. It's one of the fastest developing sciences that we have because the progress goes rapid. It's so highly relevant to our life and health that we understand the wellness of the brain, what makes us have healthy brains, how do we support mental health especially is very close to current discussions in the media. So there has been an increase of interest in neurosciences through pop culture series, through also media and news pieces, but also I think the pandemic brought home our reliance on brain health and mental well-being, how important mental well-being is to maintaining a healthy body as well.
You're a prominent figure in the field of neuroscience. What advice would you have for aspiring young people that want to enter this field?
I would first of all say follow your passion. Do what you love. Do what makes you enthusiastic about something. Follow your intuition too. And if you do what you love and if you really enjoy what you're doing, you will be able to thrive in whatever field it is. I can, of course, advertise for the STEM fields, that's natural sciences and engineering and mathematics, because these are fields where there's so much future. The development is so rapid right now that we have so much progress with machine learning, artificial intelligence, with new algorithms that help us extract major data pieces from data that are generated at hospitals, for example, to learn about what causes diseases, how can we treat diseases better, to learn about personalized medicine or precision medicine. These are applications, and this is not really one field. Neuroscience and medicine are drawing knowledge from all STEM, from all natural sciences, from engineering, from mathematics, physics, chemistry, biology, of course, psychology, and so many other sciences that are working together to solve a question together. They get around a table and they discuss from their various perspectives how they can solve a problem. And this is so interesting and so motivating in neuroscience, especially because we do that on an ongoing basis, that we collaborate with other disciplines, we have interdisciplinary teams, and we're getting together to solve a problem together with combined forces. And of course, the big piece is more than the addition of the individuals. So it's really fun to engage in these collaborations, and that's how we get involved in collaborations around the world, because we have physicians who are doing psychotherapy sending us their samples. We work with indigenous populations who collect data and send them to Lethbridge. We have our NASA collaborators who send us data from astronauts or from families who are affected by a flood or by an ice storm in Australia or in Canada, respectively, and so on. So we get samples and data sent to us from all over the world, and we're analyzing them here, and we're working with our collaborators and partners to analyze them and interpret the findings to give back to those communities, not only close to home, but also around the globe, so that we can solve problems and learn about ways how we can do better, how we can build resilience, how we can fight stress and cope with stress.
Now, I need a bit of advice from you, because every week I put together a weekly report to my superiors on what I've done all week. And sometimes it can be so challenging just to remember, what all did I do this week? And I know it's a lot of stuff, and because my schedule is always full, but when I'm putting up my weekly report, I can remember one or two things, and then it looks like I've done literally nothing all week to my boss, because there's just not a lot to it. So what advice would you have, or what advice would you give to the average person that wants to improve things like their memory or their focus?
Well, in a nutshell, I would say use it as much as you can. So It's good. There are a lot of programs for cognitive training, but I would say if you focus on one program for training, you're training this ability. You're not training other abilities at the same time. I would say get engaged with new activities. Never stop learning something new. Keep learning languages, keep traveling, keep engaging with your friends and family. Go out of the house and do something. Get your body exercised, do various different activities as much as you can to enrich your brain, because we talk about environmental enrichment, and we've seen that this is the best strategy to stay healthy across the board. We have seen that enrichment in the environment, doing many different physical and sensory activation or sensory stimulation activities will help keep the brain fit. It will help also to heal the brain after an injury. So get engaged with many different activities. Challenge your brain, challenge your body with a few non-dangerous activities, but aerobic exercise has been proven, for example, to help generate new neurons and grow new synapses, but also cognitive activities and social connectedness are doing the same. They're growing new connections in the brain as we speak, even as we interact here on screen. And it's very important to get out into the community and get involved in something that is fun. It's most important to do something that makes you happy, that engages you, that inspires you in many ways.
Dr. Gerline Metz is a researcher and professor at the University of Lethbridge in the field of neuroscience. Dr. Metz, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to be talking with you today.
Absolutely. I'm Naveen Day on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.